The following podcast may include coarse language, graphic content, and politically and/or religiously sensitive material. Those of you who are offended by such content should fuck off. Well, we're doing this again, apparently. Sigh.
We are? Who are you? How did you get into my house?
Voodoo. Didn't I say that last time? I forget.
The voodoo that you do so well?
Yeah. Anyway, this is the Daemoneye podcast, episode 19. Isekai. Summon Everyday Hero. I'm Tristan Eifler.
I'm Truck-kun.
And this is the podcast where we discuss tabletop and CRPGs, sci-fi fantasy fiction, science technology, geek culture, and Thomas Edison, Oscar Wilde / fan fiction.
I prefer going with Nikolai Tesla myself.
Yeah, it's a very shocking experience when you read it for the first time, but eventually you build some resistance to it.
Yeah, but to do that, you have to meditate and go Om all the time. It's annoying as hell.
Okay, that fulfills our quota of terrible puns, so let's get right down to brass tacks. How are you doing in this? I can't believe it's not a Resident Evil style apocalypse, Tyler.
Well, since I have the mutated gene that gives immunity to COVID-19, I'm just annoyed.
It's not that it hasn't impacted my life that much beyond, my wealth, my employment, since I teach, and despite what some studies say, teaching in person is better than teaching via online instruction. I also lost one of my gigs for the summer, so I might have to apply, file for underemployment. Not unemployment, mind you, underemployment, because I have one online gig. But beyond that, it really hasn't affected me. Well, that and, no more in-person gaming. So maybe it has a little bit. And that I bet it's affected you in the same way, though. No more in-person gaming.
Sadly, my playtest group has, every playtest group, honestly, has kind of gone flush and swirly. So my ability to write has slowed down to a damn crawl because all I can do is, the little side stuff that needs testing.
Well, the group here in Davis, California has continued on via video conferencing gaming. I just initially I didn't have the time to do it because I was trying to play catch up with transferring all my stuff to remote instruction. But at this point, I'm just saying, fuck it. I'm just going to wait until the semester ends and maybe look into it. So I don't know. Did you consider seriously going into video conferencing, online video mediated gaming?
I considered it, but it's one of those situations where I would have to wire up the entire dining area for sound, complete with a high-definition camera suspended from my ceiling over the map area so everybody could see where everything is at. And half of my players don't have a decent computer.
Ooh, that's the point. Well, I mean, there is that Steam game/program tabletop simulator and a few other online mediated, even I think some browser-based ones, which can basically take care of most of that for you instead of having to put up a whole board.
Yeah, but then I have to go through the hassle of designing all of the maps and everything like that.
Oh, that is a bit of a pain.
And as anybody who's ever ran with an actual live in-person group can tell you, players never stick to the regular or to the preset maps.
Mm-hmm. Well, I might have to look into that at some point. I mean, it maybe even give me an excuse to play with you again in some game for some of your players who can do it online, or some of my players can do it online, because it looks like this thing ain't going anywhere for a while now, and unfortunately, this sort of in-person thing won't probably be allowed for a couple months at least.
If I remember correctly, it's the 15th of this month that we're finally just saying fuck it and ending the whole lockdown thing.
Well, here in California, at least, same thing for California in general, but Yolo County has set the limit to the 31st of May, actually.
Well, yeah, but it's a fascist dictatorship. What are you going to do?
I wouldn't go that far. It's a fascist pseudo-dictatorship, Tyler. They have to acknowledge the possibility of democracy here.
Oh, so it's just a communist dictatorship.
That's what I call it, the People's Republic of Davis, Tyler. Don't you ever go to the Davis Wiki anymore? For shame.
Nope. I'm divorcing myself from California entirely.
Oh, come now. Things can change, things get better, and they can get worse. So don't say anything you won't regret. But in any event, beyond that, what else are you up to?
Well, me and the, two other people who live here, we basically just hang out and play Dungeons and Dragons online.
That thing's D&D Online is still going on?
Oh yeah, they're adding content all the time, and recently, until the end of this month, they've made it all of their normal package content that you have to buy expansion packs for. They've made it free to anybody.
It always amazes me how some of these MMORPGs, these ones you think have faded entirely from existence, are still around. Like, I heard that no less than like 5 or 10 years ago or something, that Ultima Online was still going on, or at least some version of it. And I was like a teen. I was like barely a teen when that first came out. It was the first.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to Ultima next, and then it got shit canned.
As far as I go, the spring semester as it is coming to an end soon. I'll have a brief break. Then it'll be a summer session where I'm teaching one online class, but that won't be enough to sustain me. So I'm going to be applying for underemployment, like so many other people in the state and country and where applicable to the world now. But in the fall, I'll be okay. Huh? Sorry?
Deja vu. I think you already mentioned that.
Yeah, I did. I'm just reiterating it because it's the one thing about this which really irritates me. In the fall, I'm good to go again, but everything is up in the air, which is the most bothersome thing because you never know what's going to happen at this point.
I've had to stop working out so much because, so now I'm down to working out once every week or two. Because if I work out any more, I'm losing weight too fast.
For me, I can't go to the gym anymore now, so I'm just more or less walking 3 miles a day and occasionally doing some core exercise or play with the free weights a bit. That's all I can really do at this point.
Yeah, I just do elevated push-ups, sit-ups, working out with my barbell. Then I go into the backyard and beat the crap out of a tree.
I thought it was a trunk and it was dead already.
Well, it's getting there.
One splinter at a time. All right. Well, beyond that, what else? Oh, yes. So, actual Daemoneye stuff here. Been a little slower than I would have expected, given the amount of, I don't have a lot of free time, but a little more free time stuck in the apartment here. Not as much as I would have thought. Probably the combination of stress and that's unfortunate feeling of limbo, which is surprisingly disruptive to the creative process when you can't really leave your apartment. But I'm trying to get a little more done, and a little bit of an announcement here. We are seriously considering doing a convention, if not this year, the next year in New Mexico.
Yeah, it'd be great. Actually have you over here and you can experience the joys of Albuquerque and then cry when you have to go back to California.
Oh, that is your allowed quota of bashing California here, Tyler. You have to wait till next
there is no limit.
There is a limit. Sorry. I declare it. So one con we have our kind of eyes on is New Mexicon. They are supposed to have it this year in September, but I probably won't be able to do it this year. But the next, hopefully when things have calmed down, there's actually a vaccine and or herd immunity has come and or the COVID virus mutates into Resident Evil style to zombies, we'll be able to do it, or we'll just establish a new stronghold in New Mexico by then. One of the two. So that's something to look forward to. We tried the convention shtick once in Sacramento. It was sucked. Partially because of lack of understanding of how conventions work on our part, and more because the convention staff didn't give a shit about the vendors, which is all too not too uncommon, apparently.
Well, I got a head start in the fortress. The walls of my house are made out of steel rebar reinforced concrete.
That's pretty good. But I'm guessing you haven't gotten a lot of new tenants, though.
Sadly, people tend to not do a lot of room shopping for our college students when the colleges are shut down.
Yeah, there's a global pandemic going on, so that's unpleasant. So, yeah, beyond that, just try. I actually have done something related to Daemoneye. something I've been meaning to do for a while now. I just got started, but it's worth mentioning. I wanted to kind of work up a title set for ships and ship components in Dead Stars. You know how all ships have a size category. I'm trying to translate that into a system where you can kind of build the tile maps for your ships, because a lot of action happens on ships. I like to try to work out a little system for that. So that's kind of the thing I'm working on the side right now.
Yeah, that'd be fucking awesome. Like if you had a plug and play slot system.
That's exactly what I have. I've already developed a crude set of symbols and squares for various components, worked out kind of a relative mass per space rule. Basically, every point of bulk is approximately equal to two 5x5 squares. I've also built up a set of standard ship templates. The rule being that if it's anything but spaceborne, you have to use one of these shapes because, there's air resistance or there's water resistance. You have to account for that. So it can't be like a dodecahedron. Space-based vehicles, though, anything goes.
To a limit, you have to realize that the more surface area you have, the more armor you need, the more armor mass you need in ratio to armor rating to protect from things like explosive decompression and radiation.
So I'm doing that on the side right now. I have a rough sketch on some grid paper, and I might translate it to image on the computer. From there, I might have to dig into my old book of programming to see if I can get a basic plug and play thing going. At least some sort of simple program where you can click the stuff together. I don't know. We'll see. It's little side projects I'm finally getting into.
You can probably do it in Maya.
In Maya? Yeah, I don't have Maya on this computer, and it costs like how much per year to have?
If I remember correctly, 0.
Really?
Anywhere.
I thought Maya was like one of those ridiculously expensive graphing programs which you have to spend like $200 on, like the equivalent of Adobe, Photoshop.
No, there's two different two different audiovisual programs. One of them is Maya, and I can't remember the name of the other one. But one of them is the one that you're thinking about that has an insanely high cost, but also has really good help me files and that kind of thing. And the other one is free because it's community source.
I get it. Yeah, kind of like the AVG versus AVG Pro, and it's worth spending money on the AVG Pro equivalent in this case.
Yeah. If you're doing anything heavy with it, like designing video games, but if you're doing something relatively simple, like just a graphical Tetris style plug and play thing, just go with the free one.
Well, if I was going to do a game, I would probably do it on either Blender or a Unity engine because it's easier to learn how to use and more people use it. But then again, there are enough Unity games out there, so who knows? All right. Beyond that, not much else beyond that. Anything else on your end, creative-wise?
Not really. Like I said, I've been working on Heroes of Horror. I'm at the point where I'm just like putting down stuff that needs to be playtested and statting it out, but I can't really get any playtesting done for it. See here, I got that whole idea that I had for expanding the Heroes of Horror timeline up past modern day. But that's something that I have to get the base Heroes of Horror done first to be able to work or do much more than just concept work on. I got an idea for oddly enough, an Isekai novel series. But it's going to be based on the idea is to base it on Heroes of Horror. So once again, I need to get some playtesting done in Heroes of Horror. Basically, this inability to get any playtesting done is just roadblocking everything.
I think you might have to just break down and start trying to do an online gaming thing, Tyler. Online mediated tabletop role playing.
By the time I have all the files translated and all the maps done to be able to do it, the 15th will roll around and my group can get back together. Okay, so that's right. Yeah, let's knock on wood or whatever you want to say that's going to work out. So, okay, cool. All right. Without any further ado, I guess we might as well dive into the topic Isekai, summon everyday hero. So, first of all, we're referring to Isekai, different world, because it's a more relative or familiar term to you goddamn... Oh, we wouldn't call them millennials now. What's the term for the generation that's younger than us now, Tyler? Gen Z, I think? I think so. I have no idea. I haven't been paying attention. I just call them idiots.
Now, it's not fair to make perfectly valid. Anyway, so Isekai, probably more familiar to Gen Z, call it that. It's translates in Japanese, I believe, into different world. It's an old but recently rapidly expanding subgenre of anime involving individuals from the modern era, familiar world, contemporary times, being transported to a different reality and or world, and occasionally time, although that falls into time travel more. But it's usually a fantasy world, and they are transported there or die and reincarnate in it, or in some cases they are transported or stuck in a computer simulation that is of a fantasy world. So, but as I was saying, this is actually a very old subgenre, and Isekai is just a useful term I would use to apply. Basically, trapped in another dimension. It's
to give people an idea of how old this subgenre is. We got to give proper respect to the OG Isekai. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, written by Mark Twain.
It was also known as Samuel Clemens. Yeah, that was actually the first one on my list of examples here. Yeah. Again, technically it's more of a lost in time, but it was kind of almost a pseudo-historical example of King Arthur's Court. So I guess you get away with it. But there are other older examples not quite as old as this, but other examples of this in fiction which well predate the emergence onto the mainstream of anime. Like, for example, there's William Zewalt in the Whiz Biz series. You remember that one, Tyler?
I remember that one. And don't forget The Adventures of Conrad Stargard by Leo Frankowski. That series was freaking awesome, even though, once again, it is another historical translocation one.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Who was the guy who wrote 20,000 Leagues Under or 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea?
Oh, I want to say Jules Verne's, but I got that wrong last time.
Jules Verne. Jules Verne actually wrote an isekai. I just can't remember the name of it.
So, and a little more, another example is the Spell Singer series by none other than Alan Dean Foster, who's one of the biggins of classic fantasy fiction, the Spell Singer series. First couple novels were great, then towards the later ones, they really got bad. I mean, badly written and almost cartoonish, but they were still pretty good.
Yeah, that series not only jumped the shark, it started having a shark jumping competition.
Yeah, for fuck's sake, the last book in this series was called, Figure Skating or something?
The Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny.
Another good example.
That's another good old one.
And Chronicles of Narnia, for God's sake.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so this is not a new genre, but it's been of increasing interest because, again, we're seeing a lot more of this in anime. We're seeing a lot more anime isekai.
There's also a subgenre of the subgenre called gamelit or lit RPG, where it's not only somebody who's transported to another world, but the world that they're transported to works off of MMO rules, and they can call up statuses and level up and all of that.
Yeah, the obvious, one example of many is Overlord.
Oh, yeah, that's a popular one in recent times. There's also Log Horizon, and man, honestly, the modern day isekai stories that people are familiar with all seem to be game lit. There's one that's there's one series that I have to bring up because it actually, there was a towards the end of the series, admittedly, I'm an old soldier, so I could, it kind of got to me at that level. But there's a series that's a Russian lit RPG, and for some reason, Russians have been doing really good lit RPG novels recently. It's kind of amazing.
Well, sometimes authoritarian control stimulates a lot of creativity in the underground community.
I guess that's true. But there's a series called, or let me find it real quick, Alter World by the letter D, R-U-S. It's the series, or the first book is Alter World. The name of the series is Play to Live. And it actually made me cry because the core concept is it's the future. People do the whole, brain, virtual reality MMO thing. but there's this flaw in the technology somewhere where if you spend too long in the MMO, your mind, it gets like ported into it, and your body just becomes meat that can be unplugged or even die, and you don't even notice it because you're now trapped in the MMO. Well, their main character of the book, it turns out, ends up having an inoperable brain tumor, so he illegally uploads himself to the MMO in order to survive. As the story goes on, there's a hospice for children who, with cancer or some other terminal disease that's completely incurable, that starts doing the same thing to their charges because otherwise they're going to die. And they fortify the hospital because it's been made illegal to do to do this kind of migration. They fortified a hospital to get the last of the children out, and the Russian government sends in a Spetsnaz team to kill their way through the orderlies to unplug the machines. And the leader of the Spetsnaz team just lost his daughter in an auto accident. So they don't tell them what they're supposed to be there to do. They get there, they get to the room with the doctor with all the kids plugged in, and they see that these kids are plugged into these pods, and he puts a gun on the doctor. What the hell are you doing to these kids? And the doctor explains, I'm saving them by uploading them to a virtual world. And the Spetsnaz team totally turns coat and goes and guards the perimeter.
Okay, Deja Vu, I'm pretty sure you mentioned this one before.
Yeah, I actually teared up at that scene. I was like, go dude, totally there. I feel ya.
Well, Log Horizon is also kind of like that, although it's more like Overlord in that they just happen to suddenly be in a real version of MMORPG suddenly. And of course, the other example is Sword Art Online, which it's really kind of depressing. This idiot basically traps about 6,000 players in a virtual game world and basically threatens to microwave their brains if they try to escape or if they die in the game. They're trapped there for 2 years.
Yeah, there's also the original lit RPG, I guess you could say, anime.hack. Yeah, it introduces the concept of the whole being trapped in a MMO thing, but it completely fucked it up.
Well, that's because it got up its own ass with philosophical musing, long things not happening, impenetrable plots, and not to mention the fact the story was keyed into a unnecessarily long video game series. This is a classic example of a kudzu plot, which unfortunately a lot of anime seems to suffer from. Go figure. In any event, there are a whole bunch of these. There are a bunch of examples of them in even games. Like Ni no Kuni, that's also another world. It's literally another world. It's an Isekai video game. And you can argue that Dot Hack Sign, the video game series, is also kind of a version of that. And we're seeing more and more of these suckers. Let's get into why is this so popular? What's the appeal? And I think we both know what the appeal is versus just having a fantasy world with the characters set in it, as opposed to being the characters are from another world.
Yeah, the appeal is the idea of this could happen to you.
Exactly. It's easy to identify with the protagonist. You can see themselves in it happening to you, and makes the way they react, the way they understand the world, the way they deal with the worlds. Takes less work to identify with a programmer in Scottsdale who was trapped online or who was transported there and is now a magician because he happens to know code very well. So it's a device. And my problem with that is that whenever there's a Isekai style story where the Isekai aspect, the trapped in another world or reincarnated in another world, when that is just a device to help the audience identify with it, that's the only role it has, then it becomes a cheap device. Okay? Because what my answer to that is, well, why bother with a device at all? Why not just show the world, have the main characters be in this world, and then build empathy for them through their character and their behavior? You know, the way that Game of Thrones did before it jumped the shark. Okay? Game of Thrones doesn't pretend like these characters are from Earth. It's an entirely secondary world, and yet they had great appeal because the characters were well developed, well portrayed, and despite being an entirely different world, we could see ourselves in them, and we didn't have to have this device bridging that gap.
There's also something people have been doing a lot recently, in anime and manga at least, is the concept of instead of having people go to another world that's filled with fantasy tropes and lit RPG elements, having those elements come to our world.
Yeah, the reverse Isekai. We're going to go, that's on my list of things to cover. We can jump ahead of that. Yeah, the reverse Isekai is literally just that. A fantastical element comes to our planet. There are a few examples in anime there. There's the Recreator anime series. I think I mentioned that before. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I watched it. It was pretty freaking awesome.
Even though at the end of the day, what it got down to was a OC fight. Hello?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just trying to figure out what you mean by OC.
Own character, don't steal fights.
Still don't get it.
Okay, you know how on DeviantArt, all the fiction
nope,
sites...
I don't hang out on DeviantArt.
Okay,
I actually have a life. You walked into that one eyes wide open.
Yeah, it's mostly a platform for me, to tell the truth, but because a lot of people are on there. Anyways, you know how all these writers write their own characters in either fan fiction or original characters, and they overdevelop, they create all these, what's the term? What's the term for a character who is overly powerful, does everything right? It's basically a wish fulfillment.
Mary Sue.
A Mary Sue. Basically, all these Mary Sues, and then they describe these characters in great deal, draw fan art of them, or hire people to draw art of it. They're saying how awesome these characters are, and it's the term for that is own character, like own character, OC, don't steal. And that's what Recreator got down to the end. It was basically them creating a new ultimate own character, don't steal, to fight the other ultimate own character, don't steal. It almost degenerates down to like your bunch of sixth grade
Battle of the Mary Sues.
Basically, what it was, that it almost got down to like a bunch of 6-year-olds battling in the backyard, going, "I attack with missiles. I have super missiles. No, I have ultimate missiles. No, I have a black hole." That's what it degenerates to. I'm really surprised you didn't know that term OC fights.
Oh, sorry.
And that's what it is. So I mean, it was still an interesting concept. The idea that whenever you create a fictional world, it actually is real and you can bring it to the real world. That was interesting. There's also, I think, a little better example of this, though. The Devil is a Part-Timer.
Oh, I loved that anime.
I knew you would. And it is a genuinely funny anime, too. And for once, I didn't get annoyed by the power creep in it, too. Because it actually put them on somewhat equal footing, that their magic was limited. In a lot of anime, when fantasy comes to the real world, they're just as powerful. But no, the real world has a lack of magic. They have to work for it. Literally.
Yeah. And not use it to fix fry cookers.
Yeah. I think there are a lot more creative opportunities by introducing a single fantastical element to an otherwise mundane world than introducing a single mundane element to an otherwise fantastical world. I think you can do a lot more with that, at least on the fiction-wise. What do you think?
I think you're right. There were, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but long time ago, back in the age where dinosaurs rolled D20s, there were a couple of role-playing games I can't remember the name of. One of them had the idea of a whole bunch of different role-playing worlds just kind of like attaching themselves to the real world, and you had to go from one realm to the next, and you might go into a fantasy realm and suddenly your 6 shooters wouldn't work, but you'd go to a science fiction realm and the fireball skill that you learned doesn't work anymore.
Well, now we're more going into the plane traveling stuff. That's a little different than this.
The whole thing about it was all on Earth. You would have the Midwest was suddenly taken over by a Wild West world.
Oh, are you talking about Rifts?
No, it's not Rifts.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different game. I just can't remember the name of it. They had this gimmick where the results of different tournament style play for adventure play at conventions would alter what they would do with the next source book kind of thing.
I want to say Torg, but no, that's not it.
That's it, Torg.
It is Torg? Oh, what do you know?
Yeah.
Huh.
There was another game, though, that was the idea of the other game was your character creation was a series of tests and questionnaires that you, the player, would answer, and you would then be the character in the game based on the result of the questions and tests and stuff. And then the entire world would get all horrified, like suddenly your aunt is a werewolf, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Well, despite those two examples, there really aren't a lot of examples of isekai tabletop role-playing game. It's mostly restricted to anime, fiction, and some video games, because it's really not a specific genre of tabletop role-playing game. It's more of a campaign scenario, I would say.
I'd say you're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can really do isekai in almost any role-playing game. Well, in a lot of them, I would say. You just have to tweak the rules a little bit. It would be an new interesting scenario to play modern-day humans sent to a traditional D&D world. Or in reverse, It eventually, if you extend the campaign any longer, it basically becomes a cross-planner game, which is a genre we discussed a subgenre which we discussed in the past, but it's an interesting scenario to do.
Well, one of the benefits of the Heroes of Horror D20, D&D spin-off kind of thing that I'm putting together is that the way it's designed is you easily could use it to isekai a modern-day character into a fantasy world or vice versa. Now, the whole idea of the setting is that it's our actual world, but with all the fantasy having always been there.
To get a step further, what if they get isekai'd into a world where RPG rules are the acknowledged physics, like there is HP in it?
Yeah, you could do that too.
Yeah, that'd be interesting where a player can in character yell, "I'm low on hit points" to his comrades. I've always gotten a little cheesed off by that, honestly, because I shouldn't say PTSD because that's a real problem. I shouldn't joke around with that. But yeah. I have bad memories about hearing a character in the first D&D movie going, "Yes, but you are a low-level mage." That was the cringe which sent me, for the first time in my life, walking out of the movie theater.
Yeah, that was a bad one.
Yeah, so that's why I always get a little bit of cringe whenever I hear that in an isekai where you have RPG physics in it, but it could be fun, I guess. You okay there, Tyler? You need a moment?
Yeah, just bad memories of that damn first movie.
Just think of the second movie. It will be better.
Not really.
It's like pinching yourself on the skin to distract yourself from a toothache. It will work.
Okay, so let's go on to the next subject.
Here's the thing. Isekai, we know why it's used, and it's usually a device, which is why I'm a little contemptuous of it, unless they do something more with it. They make the whole trapped in another world or reincarnated in another world. They do something more with the device other than just simply to give the protagonist some what's the word I'm looking for? Some empathy with the audience. And the best ones which do that are usually isekai stories or anime, whatever, where they deconstruct the genre in some ways.
Well, there's also the ones where the person who gets isekai'd ends up having skills that are translatable to the new world. Like there's this one manga that I read called Otherworld Pharmacy, about a pharmaceutical researcher who ends up getting isekai'd into a fantasy world with magic and all of that, and he doesn't get superpowers or anything like that. He's actually kind of a schlub, but chemistry is chemistry no matter what world you're in. So he actually sets up a pharmacy and starts selling things like eye drops and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes it more interesting where their powers come from their understanding of, science or just their different perspectives. Although you could say it's not that much different from having them be born, having them come to the world with a large amount of magic or being reincarnated as their 99th level warlock character in the MMORPG, which the Isekai world resembles.
Well, in the series, The Adventures of Conrad Stargard, the guy who gets sent back in time to, basically another world, Earth, way the hell back when, is actually a mechanical engineer. So it's a mechanical engineer in 780 Poland. Shit goes bizarre real fast.
The deconstruction of them sometimes don't make a good point, because there is I think it was a novella or a short story called "The Man Who Came Early." It's about this American Marine who was sent back to Viking Age. Well, he tries to help out, his new friends, but the problem is that even though he knows a lot of technology, he doesn't know how to make a lot of the stuff. And the stuff he does know how to make, there's no technological base for it. They're impressed by the matches he has, but he has no idea how to make them. The best he can do for them is teach them some martial arts. But then he dies as when he runs afoul of some intertribal politics. The point of that is that, a person sent back in time probably wouldn't do that well, because technology requires, you have to have some base technology. One person can very rarely make a difference because he came too early.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I have this book called "When Technology Fails," and it's this it's huge tome all about how to build up to a usable level of technology from sticks and rocks.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be a real Renaissance man / scientist with a capital S to pull that shit off like Dr. Stone. And even that's, when it's exaggerating, that's still at least somewhat realistic. My point is those individuals are rare, few and far in between. So that's interesting deconstruction. It also serves a point. It kind of demonstrates how technology is a layered process. You don't just go onto the sand and make a transistor out of it, or battery. You make simple tools, more complex tools, et cetera, et cetera. I know I pulled that or paraphrased that quote from Chairman Yang from Alpha Centauri, but it's true. And that was a good point, and it was made with this device. That's when I think it has more value as far as literature goes.
Yeah, the old cliche is true, or the old cliche is a cliche because it's true. Technology is standing on the shoulders of giants and taking the next logical step.
Mm-hmm. Other ones are just other deconstructions of more anime isekai, you might say. I mean, that's kind of actual isekai, are when it turns out that being transported to this world would actually be a lot of fringe horror. Like there's a parody of isekai called Konosuba, where the character is reincarnated there. He has a tough time. Adventuring is a grueling, difficult profession. He has to sleep in the inn and the stables a couple of nights because he couldn't get enough money to pay for his rent. It's grueling, hard work. That's one example of that. And then there's Arifureta, I think from Commonplace, The World's Strongest. That's a deconstruction that it turns out that they were summoned there by basically, spoiler alerts, they were summoned there by a jerk god who basically who's just playing a game with them. They're not, and that was an interesting approach to isekai, when they were normally summoned to destroy some great evil. Well, why would you summon like an everyday schlub or a bunch of teenagers from Japan to deal with this, to deal with great horror? That makes no sense. It turns out, again, spoilers, that it was basically the great god of the world was power hungry and insane, and just did it for the laughs. Essentially, the main character has to subvert that eventually, and the main character doesn't even want to save the world. He just wants to get fucking home. He doesn't care about saving the world. But
he ends up essentially saving the world anyway. There's a manga that does something similar. It basically translates to a gun nut in another world. Can he survive with only firepower? And it's about a teenager who is literally a gun nut who ends up getting reincarnated in a fantasy world where everybody has magic. They can conjure winds or make water appear to wash clothing, except for him. The most magical thing he's ever been able to do is, after half an hour, light a candle and then pass out.
Two things.
But
first, go ahead.
He knows how to make guns from the bottom up, And so he ends up making guns. So it's like, it's magic versus machine gun. Who's gonna win?
Two things. First of all, if he were literally a gun nut, he would be a gun that is shaped like a nut somehow. And two, I've noticed an unfortunate trend of new anime series just being descriptions of what's going on in the series rather than actual titles.
Yeah, it's kind of annoying, although it is helpful when you're just browsing to look for something new to read.
Yeah, but by the time I got reincarnated as a slime, I mean, come on.
Yeah. But it makes it so that they don't really stand out. And if you end up with two novels that are very, very similar in premise, they're going to be very, very, very similar in title.
Yep. So, I think the conclusion of this or moral is if you're going to write an isekai or Trapped in Other Worlds, or summon everyday hero fiction or write a game, do something with it. Don't just use it as a device. Integrate the act as internal use to connect it to some theme of the novel. How reality is harsh, or the true difficulty of technology, or dealing with difficulties, etc.
I would say what you should do is, before you even put pen to paper, you should think of, first off, what it is you're trying to say with your story, and secondly, what's going to be the end of your story. Don't just keep on going on and going on and going on forever. Eventually, a story has to have an end in order to be a complete tale.
Yeah. Unfortunately, writers get paid as long as they keep the story going, so they kind of ignore that last bit. I would say when writing an isekai story, is before you put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, ask yourself, could this story just be told without the main characters having come from another world? Could you have get actually the same story, make the same point without having them being transported, just being a native there? If the answer is mostly yes, maybe don't do an isekai.
Oh, there's one isekai property that we really should mention. Drifters.
Oh, yes. That's an interesting one. I haven't seen much of it, though. I keep forgetting to watch it.
It's about a fantasy world that's going through its version of World War II. And you have two competing godlike figures that are basically universal soul managers. There's one that wants to wipe all the humanoids off the face of this fantasy world and let it become a world of monsters. And there's another that wants humanoid civilization to continue existing. And they take souls from Earth that die at various points throughout history and just shove them in like pieces on pieces on a chessboard. One creating another to create another. But the hilarious thing about it is, and they've been doing this for decades, if not generations. The hilarious thing about it is the great unifier that created the human kingdoms that are massive powerhouses in this fantasy world was Hitler.
Well, not too surprised.
It gets even worse. The figure or the soul that was pulled out and put on this world to unify all of the monster races and make it so that they can actually destroy all the humanoid races is Jesus.
Well, to be fair, I'm pretty sure that these are the same people did Hellsing.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, I recognize the animation. So yeah, of course you have Nazis in there.
But it is freaking hilarious. It's like bad guys becoming good guys are turning into bad guys because they no longer have, or because Jesus ends up becoming a bad guy because he suddenly finds out that this whole God thing that he's been worshiping was essentially a delusion. So they put him in this world and they actually give him the powers that are ascribed to him in the Bible.
Fun.
So he just goes completely bug nuts. Meanwhile, Hitler finds out that there really is a greater power judges him, and that his legacy, and that like he sees his legacy on Earth decades after his death before he gets shoved into the world, and he decides to try and actually make a legacy that'll live on, not in infamy for a change.
Good luck with that. All right. Well, anything else to add? Because again, that's pretty much the end of my list here.
Yeah, that was the last thing I had on my list. We've definitely missed an entire slew of stuff, but that's just because there's so much out there, and most of it's kind of samey, to be honest.
Yeah, well, again, it's a device. You take any fantasy world, maybe put some quirks here and there, like where the character, what character was reincarnated there, or how they're reincarnated there, or what brought them there, and then insert a stereotypical fantasy world serial number XL2/DY, and just go from there. I mean, it's then maybe throw in a lot of fan service and ecchi stuff, and you have yourself an anime or a manga if you start with it. So, and that's, I think, why we're seeing a lot of that there. I mean, there is a degree of escapism to it, at the very least, because pretty much any isekai, by definition, has some escapist terms to it. But again, there's also a lot of fridge horror in it, which I think is a more interesting aspect of it to explore. And some animes and series have definitely explored that, but you're seeing a lot more of the froth rather than the mead, I think.
Actually, I just realized there are two properties I should mention. One of them for comedic value, another because they actually did something really interesting with the isekai genre. Okay. The one that's for comedic value is the Critical Failure series by Robert Bevan. It's about a group of gamers that end up having a guy come in to guest DM that they haven't met before, and the gamers are kind of dickheads, and the guy who comes to DM is like one of those railroad DMs that nobody fucking likes, hence why he's looking for a group to run. Turns out that the DM has an artifact called the Dodecahedron of Vecna.
Sounding familiar.
So he gives it to the players to roll their stats, and suddenly they are their characters in his D&D campaign. And they completely wreck it. Like there's one part where where a bunch of guards are trying to get to them as they're in a dungeon, or as they're in a corridor underneath a dungeon, in an actual dungeon like jail cells, while they're trying to break out. And in order to keep the guards from getting down, the wizards, or the sorcerer, casts Summon Mount in the hallway. And they're like, "You can't do that. You have to actually ride the mount." And he's literally arguing with the voice of the DM. What he means I can't do that. It says right there in the spell description, to be used by the caster. Well, I'm choosing to use it to block a hallway. So it's like by the third time he's summoning it, the mount is giving me these dire looks like, this really hurts, you know.
And the second one?
The second one is actually a horror series that uses the whole mind downloading uses the whole like a VR MMORPG thing called Digital Shadows, and the MMORPG that everybody plays is like a Cthulhu style horror version of the real world. And what they don't realize is that there's actually a Cthulhu mind-consuming alien invasion going on that's using the game to acquire new victims, forcing their minds into the game so their bodies are hollow and they can then occupy the body.
Now that's an interesting take. That also has some a lot of subtext there, so that's good.
Yeah, so the main characters end up having to fight this invasion both in the game in order to free people's minds so they can go back to their original bodies, as well as in the real world trying to capture these basically demon possessed people and force them to put the headgear on so that the soul can get transferred back in. And it is freaky as all hell, but really good, really well done. So far, unfortunately, though, there's only 2 books in the series. I am gasping for the 3rd one.
That's what we need to see more of if you're going to write an Isekai-style story. I might do that myself, but I have my own series to work on, finish still, other series to work on still. There are actually a couple of older fantasy novels which take the players in a tabletop role-playing game sent to the fantasy world. There are a couple of them. I forget their names, but there are some.
Yeah, Keepers of the Flame is the only one.
That's
right now.
That's definitely one. That's definitely one. Yeah. So it's not an old genre, but it's one I've seen a lot of resurgence. I just really what I want to see is there to be more done with it, more stuff done with it than just cookie cutter escapism or instant audience empathy. That's
or
why
power fap fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's pretty much it. All we have to say on the topic.
All right, I guess we're done.
A little early. All right. This has been the Daemoneye podcast, episode number 19. Isekai, Summon Everyday Hero. I'm Tristan Eifler.
I'm a forgetful god.
And we'll see you in another world!
Ooh.